Imagine this scenario. A 14-year-old pushes you to the pavement, potentially saving your life, while everyone around claims he's the source of your danger. But he wasn't the problem. He was your salvation. The morning air was still on North Highland Avenue. Autumn leaves danced along the concrete as early sunlight reflected off an approaching delivery vehicle's windshield. Rebecca Stone, 8 months into her pregnancy and radiant in a soft peach maternity outfit, entered the crosswalk. One hand rested protectively on her growing belly, the other clutched a brown bag filled with organic pears from the local farmers. "Market!" The horn blared. Everything became a whirlwind of sound and motion. Then someone crashed into her. The bag fell. Fruit scattered. Tires screamed against pavement. The truck barely missed them. Rebecca tumbled to the ground hard. Sharp pain shot through her ribs. Yet her baby, her precious baby, still moved, still lived, still stayed with her. She gasped, tears forming not from physical pain, but from overwhelming shock. Beside her lay a thin black teenager, perhaps 14 years old. His sweatshirt was damp with perspiration, his elbows scraped at an odd angle. He remained silent, just staring at her as if amazed by his own actions. "Are you hurt?" she managed to whisper. He gave a single nod, already struggling to stand despite his limp. His denim was ripped at the knee, blood seeping through the tear. His gaze swept nervously around, not checking on her well-being, but scanning the gathering crowd. The bystanders, predominantly white, had formed a tight circle around them. Rather than offering assistance, their words cut like blades through the air. "You pushed her down. What were you doing near her anyway? Kids like you don't belong. In this area, trying to play hero, huh? I bet you're the reason for this whole mess." The teenager's frame went rigid, his mouth trembling, yet he spoke no words in his defense. He stood there, shoulders drooping, pulse racing through the cuts on his legs. They couldn't see the terror in his expression, the anguish, or the reality that his immediate reaction had been to protect her. To them he was simply another black youth in a hoodie, presumed guilty without question. It's heartbreaking when a child faces judgment based solely on appearance, consistently overlooked, perpetually blamed, hit like, if you want to send support, to that small, courageous spirit who chose to do right. Rebecca stared at the crowd in disbelief. Her mouth fell open. Were they being serious? She turned back to the boy, taking in his wounded leg, the dirt on his face, the quiet determination in his eyes. Before he could walk away, she grasped his hand. "Wait," her voice cracked. You saved my baby." The boy froze in place. "Thank you," she repeated more deliberately this time. "Truly." "Really?" He blinked in surprise, as though such words were foreign to him. He glanced down at their connected hands, then gently pulled away. "What do they call you?" she asked. "Elijah," he said quietly, before turning and limping toward the corner of Pont de la Avenue. Rebecca watched his retreat, feeling something constrict in her chest. She wanted to call him back, to learn more, but all she could manage was to whisper his name again, tasting its significance. Later that evening, while her husband Matthew scrolled through work emails at their lengthy marble dining table, Rebecca replayed the incident repeatedly in her mind. The fall, the rescue, the boy, and that wordless, profound gratitude. "He's only a child," she said aloud. Matthew didn't lift his head. "Which child?" "The one who rescued me today. Elijah's his name. He couldn't be older than 14. Poor, reserved, yet brave." Matthew sighed dismissively. "I'm relieved you're safe. That's what counts." Rebecca's eyes narrowed slightly. "I want to properly thank him. I've invited him for dinner tomorrow. I'd like to know him better." Matthew looked up now. "What's the point?" "Because he risked everything for me." Matthew leaned back, twirling his wine-glass stem. "That's admirable, but let's not go overboard. There's a reason kids like him find themselves in trouble. You understand that?" Rebecca remained silent. Her attention had already shifted to the window where city lights twinkled in the darkness. Tomorrow, she would seek out Elijah again. and his request would transform everything. The following afternoon, the air carried hints of grilled hot dogs and fresh-cut grass. Rebecca stood on the front steps of a humble two-bedroom house off Edgewood Avenue, holding a small bag of fruit and a handwritten thank-you note. She took a deep breath before knocking. Elijah opened the door with wary eyes and a slightly swollen knee. His hoodie was cleaner now, but his expression carried the same exhaustion as if life had taught him not to trust open gestures too quickly. "Ma'am?" he asked. "Hello, Elijah. I hope you don't mind my visit. I needed to thank you properly." Behind him, a woman in her 40s appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Who's there, honey?" Rebecca smiled warmly. "Mrs. Reed? I'm Rebecca Stone. Your son saved my life yesterday." The woman's face showed confusion, then concern. "Oh my. Please come in." Inside, the house was compact but immaculate. A Bible rested on the coffee table beside a tin of sewing supplies and an old photograph of Elijah's parents in Sunday clothes. The space radiated the warmth of people who possessed little but treasured what they had. Rebecca sat across from the family as Elijah's mother served iced tea in mismatched glasses. His father, a tall man with weathered hands and weary eyes, sat quietly beside him. "I wanted to invite Elijah to our home," Rebecca said, selecting her words thoughtfully, "for dinner, and to learn more about your family. I'd like to help, however." "I can." Elijah looked toward his parents. His mother shifted uncomfortably. "We're grateful, ma'am," she said, "but we're not seeking charity." "It's not charity," Rebecca responded. "It's gratitude." Silence filled the room. Then Elijah spoke, his voice soft but direct. "May I ask you something?" Rebecca nodded. "Of course. My neighborhood, it's being demolished for new condos. My parents won't discuss it much, but I heard your husband's company is handling the project." Rebecca blinked in surprise. "We don't want money," Elijah added quickly. "I just want you to speak with him. Ask him to halt it." A long silence stretched between them. Rebecca stared at the boy, stunned by the sincerity in his voice. He wasn't seeking a handout. He was asking for a chance for his family, for his neighbors. "I'll speak with him," she said softly. "I promise." That evening, back at the Stone estate, dinner was tense. Rebecca waited until the dessert utensils clinked down before speaking. "Matthew," she began, "are you aware of a housing development?" "On Edgewood?" He didn't look up. "Yes, we're building some units there. Investors expect significant returns. They're displacing entire families. Families like the boy who saved my life." Matthew sighed, pushing his plate aside. "Rebecca, this isn't personal, it's business. We're providing relocation packages." $500 isn't relocation, she snapped. "It's abandonment." He leaned back, crossing his arms. "You want me to cancel a $20 million deal because some street kid happened to be in the right place at the right time? I want you to cancel it because it's the right thing to do." Matthew studied her for a long moment. Then, with a reluctant nod, he said, "Fine, I'll shut it down. But don't make this a habit." Rebecca felt tension leave her shoulders that she hadn't realized she was carrying. She smiled faintly. "I'm going to invite them to stay here temporarily," she added. Matthew froze. "What?" "Just until they get back on their feet. Elijah can complete school. His father can drive for you. His mother can assist me here." Matthew narrowed his eyes. "You're serious?" "I'm grateful," she said simply. "And I want to repay that with dignity, not pity." He stared at her but ultimately said nothing more. The Reeds moved into the Stone mansion 2 days later. Elijah's mother cooked with quiet expertise. His father drove Matthew to meetings without complaint, and Elijah enrolled in a local private school, walking the marble hallways with his head down, uncertain how long this peace would last. Because even as sunlight streamed through crystal chandeliers and linen curtains, Elijah couldn't shake the chill in his bones, the feeling that somewhere Someone was waiting for it all to crumble. For a while, it felt like divine grace. Elijah's mother, Lorraine, filled the Stone estate with aromas of herb-roasted chicken and warm peach cobbler. His father, Harold, shaved daily for the first time in years, donning a crisp black suit as Matthew Stone's personal driver. Elijah attended classes in khakis and button-downs instead of thrift store jeans, blending in just enough to avoid whispers, at least temporarily. But peace, Elijah was discovering, always carried a price. It began with glances. The housekeeper avoided his gaze. A neighbor down the street, an elderly woman with pearls and judgment in her tone, muttered, "Charity case, I see," when she spotted Elijah in the garden. Then came the whispers from Matthew's business partners. "Is he living here now? It's risky. Matt, give them an inch." Matthew dismissed them publicly, but at home tension simmered. His voice grew sharper. He stopped addressing Harold by name. Sometimes when Elijah entered a room, Matthew would fall silent, his stare lingering too long. Rebecca noticed. One night, while folding Elijah's school uniforms, she asked gently, "Is everything all right at school?" Elijah hesitated. "It's fine." "Are you certain?" He shrugged. "I've endured worse." She didn't push further, but her grip tightened on the fabric. The real break came weeks later. Matthew had a flight scheduled for New York, an investor summit. He insisted Harold drive him to the airport. The morning was foggy, the road slick. Elijah was helping Lorraine chop onions when the call came. There had been an accident. Harold had swerved to avoid a deer and the car slammed into a concrete barrier. Matthew's injuries were severe. He was alive but paralyzed from the waist down. Rebecca sat motionless at the hospital, her hand on her swollen belly, listening to doctors explain spinal damage and wheelchairs. Harold, detained by police for questioning, sat bruised and pale in a separate wing. But the worst was yet to come. 2 days after Matthew returned home, Rebecca experienced intense abdominal pain during dinner. She collapsed in the hallway. By the time they reached the emergency room, it was too late. The baby, 8.5 months along, was gone. The news spread through the mansion like smoke. Lorraine wept alone in the laundry room. Elijah stood outside under the porch light, fists clenched, whispering, "I'm sorry," though he had done nothing wrong. Matthew's silence lasted until the funeral. He watched the tiny white coffin lower into the earth with dry, unreadable eyes. Then he spoke, not to Rebecca, not to God, but to Elijah. "You did this," he growled. "Your family. You entered my home and cursed it." Rebecca turned sharply, her eyes wide. "Matthew!" But he raised a hand to silence her. "Your father's negligence crippled me. Your mother poisoned our food, and now," his voice cracked, "now my son is dead." "She didn't poison anything," Elijah said quietly. Matthew's stare hardened. "Get out of my house, all of you." The police were already waiting back at the estate. Harold was arrested for reckless endangerment. Lorraine for suspected food contamination with malicious intent. Neither resisted or protested. They were too broken to fight. Elijah stood in the driveway as rain began to fall, watching his parents taken away in separate cars. He held a duffel bag containing 2 shirts, a comb, and a Bible. No one spoke to him. No one told him where to go. Rebecca tried to reach out to say something, but Matthew grabbed her arm. "Let them go." And so she did. Elijah walked into the rain alone, his heart hollow, each step heavier than the last. In the distance, the mansion's lights flickered behind him, bright, warm, and entirely unreachable. The following days blurred, together like watercolor left in the rain. Elijah wandered Atlanta's streets, his shoes soaked through, his clothes sour with dampness. He slept beneath bus shelters, scavenged behind restaurants, and drank from schoolyard fountains at dawn. But it wasn't hunger that hollowed him, it was betrayal. He had given his trust, his family had given their labor, and it had cost them everything. Worse, he couldn't even prove their innocence. People stared, some whispered, a few jeered. He overheard them in grocery parking lots and outside gas stations. That's the stray the Stones threw out. Guess that good deed didn't pay off. Told you nothing good comes from taking them in. One morning, while searching through a dumpster behind an upscale apartment complex in Midtown, Elijah froze. His eyes narrowed at the sight of a familiar figure emerging from the side entrance, Matthew Stone in a tailored coat, standing, walking. Elijah's breath caught. He ducked behind the dumpster wall and watched as Matthew approached a black Mercedes and opened the door. Not for a nurse or assistant, but for a woman. Blonde. Young. Not Rebecca. The woman kissed his cheek, laughing softly as they drove away. Elijah followed for 3 blocks, keeping to the shadows until the car stopped outside a downtown cafe. The woman went in first. Matthew lingered to take a phone call. Elijah moved closer, careful to stay behind a pillar, close enough to hear. What he heard shattered the world he thought he knew. She still doesn't suspect, Matthew said into the phone, his voice cold. That food wasn't poisoned by the maid. I slipped something in myself. Was aiming for both of them, but only the baby died. He paused, then laughed bitterly. And the car crash. Please. I rigged the brakes myself. All it took was a little manipulation to make that old fool crash. Now the kid's gone, the parents are locked up, and Rebecca's too numb to fight back. Once she signs the new trust papers, it's all mine. Elijah's stomach twisted, his head spun. He backed away, almost stumbling into the alley wall. It wasn't an accident. The miscarriage, the crash, the arrests, it was all planned. Matthew Stone hadn't just betrayed Elijah's family. He had murdered his own child. Elijah didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat behind a closed laundromat, knees drawn to his chest, thinking about Lorraine's gentle hands, Harold's quiet prayers, Rebecca's laughter in the kitchen. He thought about what Matthew had stolen, not just lives, but trust, dignity, and then he thought about what had to be done. By sunrise, he'd made his decision. At 6:45 p.m. the next evening, the Stone mansion glowed with soft amber lights. Inside the dining room was set for 2. Rebecca sat at the long table in a navy dress, her eyes distant. Matthew poured red wine into 2 crystal glasses. To healing, he said, raising his glass. She hesitated, and then the front doors burst, open. Elijah stood there, soaked from head to toe, mud clinging to his sneakers, jaw tight with urgency. Matthew rose to his feet, face contorting. "You! I had you thrown out!" Elijah didn't flinch. He stepped forward, pointing to the glass in Rebecca's hand. "Don't drink that." Rebecca blinked, confused. "He's trying to kill you," Elijah said. "He's the one who poisoned the food before, not my mom. He staged the accident too. I heard him say it. He's lying to everyone, including you." Rebecca's hand trembled, the wine glass halfway to her lips. Matthew laughed, strained and hollow. "You're insane." "Then drink it," Elijah challenged, picking up the untouched second glass and holding it out. Silence. Matthew didn't move. "Drink it," Elijah repeated. "If it's safe." Still, Matthew didn't reach. His eyes darted between them, calculating. Then Elijah walked over to the ornate fish tank in the corner of the room and slowly poured the wine into it. Within seconds, the fish floated belly up. Rebecca dropped her glass. Matthew's mask cracked. His jaw clenched, his hand trembled. "You monster," she whispered. "Why?" Matthew's face contorted into something vicious. "Because I was tired of being your lapdog. Your son would have inherited everything. My work, my money. All because of your stupid heartstrings and a street kid in a hoodie." Elijah stepped forward. "That street kid saved her life, and he's about to save it again." The sound of sirens pierced the air outside. Rebecca turned to Matthew, eyes wide. "You called the police?" Elijah shook his head. "I did." And for the first time in weeks, Rebecca breathed. Justice had finally walked through the door. The police entered the Stone mansion with purpose. Rebecca didn't flinch. She stood motionless, the fish tank still swirling with poisoned wine behind her and Elijah at her side, muddy, trembling but unshakable. His hand rested on the dining table, knuckles white as if holding the house together through sheer will. Two officers approached. Matthew, their expressions stern but neutral. "Matthew Stone," the taller one said, "you're under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. You have the right to remain silent." Matthew's jaw clenched. He looked to Rebecca, not with remorse, but with a flash of desperation. "You called them?" he hissed. "No," she answered, voice steady. "He did." She nodded at Elijah. Matthew scoffed. "They'll never believe him. He's a nobody." Elijah met his eyes. "Maybe, but the truth doesn't need to be famous, just loud enough to be heard." The officers cuffed Matthew, and as they led him past Elijah, he spat venom one last time. "You think you've won? You'll crawl back to the gutter where you belong." But Elijah didn't respond. He didn't need to. The look in his eyes, steady, wounded, unafraid, spoke volumes louder than words. As the front doors closed behind the police, silence settled over the grand dining room like dust after a storm. Rebecca sank slowly into her chair, shoulders shaking. "He really would have killed me." "Yes, ma'am," Elijah said quietly. She looked up at him, her face drawn with exhaustion and disbelief. "And you came back anyway." "I couldn't let him finish what he started," Elijah murmured. "Not after everything." Tears welled in her eyes. "I didn't believe you at first. I let him twist everything. I let him destroy your family." "You didn't know," Elijah said, voice softer now. "But you do now." The next morning, Rebecca stood on the courthouse steps, reporters swarming like hornets. But she wasn't silent. She spoke clearly, publicly, and with purpose. "My husband orchestrated the wrongful arrest of an innocent family. He manipulated the system to protect himself and blame others. Today, that ends." She didn't say his name again. Instead, she turned to Elijah, who stood beside her in a clean white shirt, hair combed back, hands folded nervously. "He saved me once before, and he saved me again last night. The Stone family owes a debt of truth to Elijah Reed and his parents, Lorraine and Harold." By the end of the week, charges against Elijah's parents were dropped. Harold was released from jail. Gaunt, but proud. Lorraine stepped out moments later, holding her son's hand so tightly it turned white. She didn't cry until she saw Rebecca waiting at the car. "I'm sorry," Rebecca whispered. "I should have seen him for what he was." Lorraine studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "We all see what we want until it costs us something." Elijah rode in silence most of the way back to Edgewood. The city looked different now. Not softer, but more honest. Cracked sidewalks, faded murals, barking dogs. It was still home, but he was no longer the boy looking down. He was the boy who had spoken up and been heard. That night they sat together on their old porch, Harold, Lorraine, Elijah, and Rebecca, passing around a peach cobbler wrapped in foil. No white tablecloths, no chandeliers, just chairs that creaked and laughter that didn't sound forced. "Will you stay here?" Lorraine asked Rebecca gently. Rebecca smiled faintly. "No. I'm going to start something new. Maybe somewhere quieter, but I'll be around. I still owe you all dinner." Elijah grinned. "Just make sure there's less drama next time." They all laughed. As the stars blinked above the old neighborhood, a breeze swept past the porch, lifting Elijah's hoodie slightly. He looked out across the street at the homes that still stood because of a promise, and whispered to no one in particular. Justice isn't always loud, but when it comes, it echoes. And in that moment, for the first time in a long time, the night didn't feel heavy. It felt whole. Weeks passed, the headlines faded, the reporters moved on, and the world restless and hungry for newer scandals, turned its attention elsewhere. But for the Reed family and for Rebecca Stone, the story didn't end in flashing cameras or courtroom drama. It ended quietly in the slow, steady rhythm of rebuilding. Matthew Stone was convicted on multiple counts: attempted murder, fraud, conspiracy, and tampering with evidence. The courtroom had fallen silent when the jury foreman read the verdict. Guilty on all charges. He would serve life without parole in a federal facility, far from the marble floors and towering windows he once called home. The Stone fortune, once shielded behind legal smoke and glass towers, was cracked wide open. With Rebecca's full cooperation, restitution was arranged. Several families from Edgewood, displaced by Matthew's schemes, were compensated and given new housing. A trust fund started by Rebecca in her late son's name began work quietly, paying for scholarships, food programs, and legal support for falsely accused minority families. Elijah never spoke much about that night again. He didn't like being called a hero. "I just told the truth," he would say, eyes low. That should have been enough all along. But in the eyes of those who knew, the truth had needed a voice, and Elijah had provided one. He returned to school, not at the private academy with polished floors and forced smiles, but at his old public school where he felt he belonged. He joined the debate team, surprising himself with how much he enjoyed speaking up. His first speech was about silent courage. His parents, Lorraine and Harold, found new jobs with a community foundation supported by Rebecca's trust. They moved into a modest brick house not far from the one they lost, where Lorraine filled the kitchen with laughter again and Harold prayed a little louder in the mornings. Rebecca sold the mansion. She couldn't sleep there anymore, not with its walls echoing with memory and betrayal. She moved to a small craftsman-style home in Decatur, where the floors creaked and the garden grew wild. There she began again, not as a socialite, not as a millionaire's wife, but as a volunteer, a listener, a woman who had learned too late how fragile trust could be. One Saturday morning she found herself standing outside the Reed family home, with a brown paper bag in hand, peaches, fresh from the farmer's market. Lorraine opened the door, smiled, and stepped aside, without a word. The four of them sat around the kitchen table eating peach slices off chipped plates. No silverware, no formality, just quiet, respectful company. Rebecca turned to Elijah. "I never asked," she said. "Why did you come back that night, after everything?" Elijah looked at her for a long moment. Then he answered slowly, deliberately, "Because you looked like someone worth saving twice." The room fell still. Lorraine reached out and placed her hand gently over her son's. Harold nodded quietly. And Rebecca, she wept, not out of guilt this time, but out of a strange, quiet kind of gratitude for a boy who never stopped believing that people could do better. As the sun dipped behind the trees that afternoon, the porch light flickered on, and for the first time since the storm began, everything felt steady. No one would ever build a monument for Elijah Reed. No street would bear his name. But in a neighborhood that had nearly vanished, in a family that had nearly broken, and in a woman who had nearly died twice, his courage had carved a legacy. Not of noise, not of fame, but of justice. And sometimes that's more than enough.